My name is Claire Morgan, and I live in America. I want to take you back to the house where I grew up, a small rental on the edge of Cleveland, Ohio. It wasn't a grand house, just 2 bedrooms for 4 people, paint peeling from the porch, and a heater that rattled every winter. But it held the story of my family, stories that shaped me in ways I didn't expect. My parents, Robert and Linda, worked hard but always seemed to give their softest love to my younger sister, Emma. From the time we were children, Emma was treated as the jewel of the family. My mother would say, "Emma is our bright crown, our hope." My father often added, "She will carry us forward one day." They never said such things to me. I was the one who did the dishes, who kept quiet at the dinner table, who learned to accept being in the background. And yet, I studied as hard as I could, hoping they would see me. The turning point came when my college sent the bill for the next semester's tuition. I remember it so clearly. The faded light bulb above our kitchen table, the smell of my father's black coffee, the sound of Emma humming in the next room while scrolling through her phone. My father sat down with the folded paper in his hand, his face heavy. He slid the bill across the table toward me, shook his head, and said, "Claire, we can't pay for you anymore. We need to save everything for Emma. She deserves the best schools, the best future." My mother, standing at the counter with her arms crossed, looked straight at me. Her words were colder than the November wind that slipped through the drafty windows. "Claire, you will never be successful. Learn from your sister." I felt those words like a stone on my chest. My throat closed, and I forced myself not to cry. I nodded as if I understood, but inside me, something cracked. I excused myself, walked out onto the porch, and stared at the flickering porch light. The night air was sharp, cutting my lungs with each breath, but it was that moment I promised myself I would not break. What my parents didn't know was that I had already begun building something of my own. Late at night, while Emma slept peacefully, I sat with my laptop at the wobbly kitchen desk. I had found work online, freelance contracts, digital projects, small opportunities that grew with each month. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't loud, but it was steady. Every month, I earned $20,000, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. I was careful, organized. I saved every receipt, every invoice, every email confirmation. I stored the paper statements in a shoebox under my bed, the one place I knew no one would look. My parents didn't care much about my corner of the room, and Emma never stepped into my side of the hallway. That shoebox was my secret vault, proof of what I was building, proof that I was not the failure they believed me to be. I kept my secret locked tight. I didn't even tell Olivia James, my closest friend from high school who had moved to Chicago for her studies. Olivia would have celebrated me, lifted me higher, but I wasn't ready to share. I didn't tell Ben Carter, our neighbor who often waved from his dusty pickup truck and sometimes helped shovel snow from our walkway. I didn't even tell Dr. Helen Ward, my favorite professor, who once said my essays were written with grit and light. I told no one because I wanted to prove it first to myself most of all. Each time my parents praised Emma, each time they overlooked me, I worked harder. When they bought Emma a new laptop with money they said they couldn't spare, I bit my lip and invested in better software for my online projects. When they drove her to campus visits across different states, I stayed home and built spreadsheets late into the night. I learned how to stretch my time, how to balance exhaustion with determination. There were nights my eyes blurred with the glow of the screen, and I had to press cold water against my face to stay awake. I taught myself discipline the way other people teach themselves a language. And slowly, dollar by dollar, I built my independence. Sometimes I would sit with a map on my desk, tracing my finger across the wide blue of the Atlantic. One day, I whispered, "I will see Europe. I will stand in London, in Paris, in Rome." But then I would draw my finger back across the map and remind myself of where I was. First, I told myself, I will build a life here in America. I will stand on my own 2 feet. No one will be able to deny me then. The shoebox under my bed grew heavier each month, not just with money, but with proof of my worth. It became the quiet anchor in my life, the secret that let me walk through the days with a hidden strength. When my mother said, Emma will get the best, and you should just support her. I pressed my lips together and thought of the shoebox. When my father said, "Don't waste time dreaming, Claire," I nodded politely and thought of the contracts waiting in my email. What hurt me most wasn't the lack of money, it was the lack of belief. My parents had enough for Emma's school, for her books, her clothes, her trips, and even for her dreams. But for me, they offered only doubt. They believed that my future had no wings. And yet, I knew something they did not. My wings were already unfolding. Looking back, I think that moment at the kitchen table was the true beginning of my story. The night they told me I wasn't worth their support, I realized I had to become my own support, my own belief, my own hope. That night, I grew up faster than I expected. So I kept working, kept earning, and kept building. And though my parents thought they had cut me down, they had, without knowing it, given me the strongest reason to rise. A year after that night at the kitchen table, my shoebox had turned into a treasure chest. Every month, I stacked my statements neatly, every line proving that I had built something with my own two hands. It wasn't just numbers, it was proof of dignity. By then, I had saved enough to do something no one thought possible: buy a house. It wasn't a castle or a mansion. I didn't want gold gates or marble floors. What I wanted was a place where every wall whispered, "This is yours." I looked across neighborhoods in Columbus, Ohio, a city that felt close enough to Cleveland to keep my roots but far enough to carve a new story. I toured homes with real estate agents who doubted me the second I walked through the door. Maybe it was the way I still wore jeans that had frayed at the knees, or the way I carried my old canvas backpack instead of a polished purse. They asked if my parents were the buyers. They asked if I needed to consult a husband or a fiancé. Each time I smiled and said, "No, this is mine. Just mine." When I found the house, I knew. A 3-bedroom with light spilling through tall windows, a maple tree guarding the front yard, and a white door that seemed to smile in the afternoon sun. It wasn't perfect, paint chipped on the back fence, and the kitchen tiles were dated, but it breathed possibility. The asking price was $465,000, and for the first time in my life, I felt ready. At closing, I sat at a long table with a pen in my hand. The papers looked endless, like a mountain of proof that I belonged here. My hands shook as I signed, not from fear but from the weight of victory. The real estate agent's voice blurred as she congratulated me. All I saw was my name, printed in bold at the bottom of the deed. Claire Morgan, owner. I stepped into the house alone that evening, the key still warm from my pocket. The rooms were empty, hollow, waiting for breath. I set my only possession for the kitchen, a blue ceramic cup, on the counter. The sound echoed like laughter in a cathedral. I laughed too, because for the first time in my life, the echo belonged to me. I called Olivia James, my best friend in Chicago, and told her, I did it. I bought a house. Her voice cracked into tears. Claire, I knew you could. I'm so proud of you. She promised to visit as soon as she could, to walk through the halls with me, and toast with coffee instead of champagne. That weekend, Ben Carter, my neighbor from Cleveland, drove down with his toolbox. Need shelves? He asked, his grin crooked but kind. I nodded, and together we filled the silence of the house with the sound of drilling. He measured carefully, humming under his breath, every shelf as straight as a soldier. I thanked him with coffee in my blue cup, and he raised it like a glass. To your house, Claire. To your name on the door. At night, before I had furniture, I spread a blanket on the hardwood floor and lay under the quiet. The walls seemed to hold me the way my parents never had. I thought of my father's voice saying, "You will never be successful." I thought of my mother's sharp words, comparing me to Emma. And then I thought of the shoebox, the receipts, the long nights with burning eyes, the work that carved this key into my palm. I slept that first night with a kind of peace I had never known. No footsteps down the hall telling me I was less. No voices asking me to give way. No shadow of Emma's bright crown above me. Just the sound of my own breath, steady and free. In the weeks that followed, I furnished the rooms slowly. A couch secondhand from a store in downtown Columbus, a bed frame I built myself with Ben's help, Curtains Olivia mailed in a box with a handwritten note. Your windows deserve soft light. Each piece felt like a stone laid into the foundation of my independence. But the house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was a promise. Each morning when I turned the key, I reminded myself, I did this. I paid for this with the dollars I earned. Every corner was a story. The office where I would keep building my online work, the kitchen where I would cook with laughter, the porch where I would one day sit with friends. Sometimes, though, memories of my parents crept in. I would sit on the floor and remember their faces that night, their cold dismissal. I wondered if they ever thought of me, if they regretted their words. Part of me longed for them to see this house, to understand the daughter they had doubted. But another part of me, stronger and louder, whispered, no, this is mine, not theirs. They did not believe in you, so they do not get to claim you now. The house became my shield, my sanctuary. When I locked the white door at night, I wasn't just keeping out strangers. I was keeping out the echoes of doubt, the weight of rejection, the lies I had been told about my worth. Inside those walls, I was no one's shadow. I was the writer of my own story. One evening, I stood outside on the lawn, the maple trees' branches moving in the wind. I looked at the windows glowing with warm light and felt a swell of pride so strong it nearly broke me. For years, I had been told I would never succeed, that my role was to step aside and let Emma shine. Yet here I was, standing before a home I had bought with my own earnings that my parents never believed I could make. The truth was simple. I had proved them wrong. But more than that, I had proved myself right. And as I turned to go inside, the house was waiting, the white door smiling. I knew this was only the beginning. When the furniture finally arrived, I felt as if the house itself had taken its first breath. The empty echo of rooms softened into warmth as couches, tables, and shelves began to fill the space. It was no longer just a building with walls and windows, it was becoming my home. I wanted someone from my family to see it, not for approval, but for proof. Proof that I had carved a life for myself when they thought I would never rise. So I invited Emma. She arrived one crisp Saturday morning, her red coat catching the sunlight like a flame. She stepped inside and looked around with wide eyes, her boots clicking gently against the hardwood. She touched the walls as if they were loaves of bread pulled warm from an oven, her hands pressing with wonder. Claire, she whispered, I had no idea. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, almost fragile. I smiled and hugged her. Despite everything, I had never hated Emma. She was only living in the role my parents had given her. She was their chosen one, but she never asked to be cast in that part. I'm proud of your grades, I told her, because I truly was. She had always been clever with books and exams. Her eyes fell on the thick white envelope resting on the dining table. She slid it open and gasped when she saw the receipt for the purchase. Her fingers traced the numbers as though they might vanish if she blinked. $465,000, she breathed. Yes, I answered simply. Her eyes darted up to mine. How, Claire? I gave her the truth I had given myself every night for a year. I pay myself first, I said softly. Then taxes. Then everything else. She stared at me for a long moment, her lips parted, before folding the paper neatly and sliding it back. She didn't press me with questions. She didn't accuse me of hiding. She just nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw not a rival but a sister standing in front of me. The next afternoon, the peace of my new home cracked. I had not invited them, but my parents came anyway. I was in the hallway with Ben Carter, who was tightening a shelf he had installed. The doorbell rang once, sharp and insistent. I opened the door, and there they were, Robert and Linda Morgan, standing stiffly on the porch. My father's eyes went immediately to the table inside, where the deed lay under a glass paperweight. His face drained of color. My mother gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was louder than the drill still buzzing in Ben's hand. Finally, my father's voice broke the air, hoarse and trembling. How? I could have told them 1,000 things. I could have reminded them of the nights they told me I was nothing. I could have shouted about the years I swallowed their doubts. But I did not. I gave them the truth, plain and unshaken. I earn $20,000 a month online, I said. I've been doing it for over a year. My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's hands shook at his sides. They asked questions quickly, desperately, where, how, why I hadn't told them. But beneath the questions was something else. Fear. Fear of being wrong about me. Fear of realizing the daughter they had dismissed had built something greater than they imagined. They asked to come in. They asked to sit. They asked for tea, as if we could pretend this was a normal visit. Then my father, with his voice heavy, said the words I had longed to hear and dreaded all at once. We were wrong. We are sorry. Please forgive us, and let us into this righteous home. I looked at them through the doorway. Behind me, the white walls held the laughter of my first night, the comfort of my first sleep without doubt. The girl I had been, the one sitting at the kitchen table when they cut my tuition, the one who swallowed her tears on the porch, reached out inside me. She held my hand steady as I answered. I hear your words, I said, but I am not ready. My mother's tears spilled. My father's jaw clenched, then loosened. They looked smaller than I remembered, not in size but in certainty. Their power over me had slipped like sand through fingers. I stepped outside, pulled the white door gently but firmly behind me, and stood on the porch with them. I need time. I need space. My voice was calm, not cruel, but final. They tried again, pleading, softening, repeating the word forgive. But forgiveness is not a key handed out like spare change. It is something earned, something grown. And they had not yet sown the seeds. Inside, I heard Ben clear his throat awkwardly, the sound of his tools still in the hallway. He knew this was not his moment, and he gave me space. I was grateful for that. When my parents realized I would not open the door, they stepped back, pale faces bent toward the sidewalk. My mother glanced over her shoulder one last time, her eyes full of a sorrow I couldn't yet receive. Then they walked away, their steps heavy, their bodies shrinking into the distance. I stood on the porch long after they were gone, the cool air brushing against my skin. Part of me trembled, but another part, deeper, stronger, stood tall. For the first time, I had faced them not as a child begging for approval, but as a woman with her own ground, her own walls, her own roof. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in the glow of the soft light. The deed rested beneath the paperweight, steady and silent. I ran my fingers across it, tracing my name, Claire Morgan, owner. My parents' faces haunted me, pale, broken, pleading, but I did not regret my choice. They had closed the door on me long ago, when they chose Emma and told me I was nothing. All I had done was return the silence they once gave me. It hurt, yes, but it also healed. Because for once, the door I closed was mine to close. They came back the next week and the week after. My parents never announced their visits, never called ahead, never asked if I wanted to see them. They simply appeared on my porch like ghosts who had suddenly remembered the living. Sometimes they brought flowers, white lilies wrapped in cheap cellophane from the grocery store. Other times, they came empty-handed, their faces heavy with hope, and then there were days when Emma came with them. She never rang the bell. She stood quietly to the side, her red coat zipped to her chin, her eyes fixed on the sidewalk as though she were embarrassed by the scene. I wondered if she came out of loyalty to them, or out of love for me. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. From the hallway, I listened to the sound of the bell. It rang, over and over, sharp and demanding, as though persistence alone could undo the past. Ben Carter, who still helped me with repairs around the house, would glance at me with questioning eyes. I always shook my head. He never argued. He would simply return to his hammer, his drill, or his coffee, the noise of his work drowning out the knocking. I did not open the door. Some might say it was cruel, but I did not feel cruel. I felt steady. For years, I had been the child who opened her heart again and again, only to have it dismissed as not enough. I had been told to learn from Emma, to accept my role as the shadow. But now, standing inside my own house with my name on the deed, I understood that my silence was not revenge. It was a boundary. I kept living my life. I paid the mortgage each month with money I earned through the quiet work my parents had once dismissed as foolish. I planted herbs, basil, thyme, rosemary, in little pots by the kitchen window, watching them grow in the sunlight. I framed a photo of Lake Erie, taken on a windy day when the water looked wild and free, and hung it over my couch. It reminded me that I, too, had once been tossed about, but now I had carved out my shoreline. I gave back, too. I donated $500 to a local library that had given me shelter as a child when I needed quiet places to read. I sent $1,000 to a shelter in Detroit, remembering the years when my family had told me I wasn't worth investment. I wanted other young women to know they were worth every dollar, every dream. When Olivia finally visited, I greeted her at the white door with arms wide open. She carried a suitcase and her laughter, filling the house with warmth. We sat on the back steps with mugs of coffee, watching the stars. "They look different when you own your roof," she said, her eyes reflecting the night sky. We talked about Europe, about art museums in Paris, and about walking across London bridges. But always we came back to the same truth. This house was the first dream I had made real. At night, I wrote at the kitchen table. Not for work, not for money, but for myself. I wrote down my story in simple words, the kind a child could read, because my life had finally become simple. Not easy, never easy, but simple in its clarity. My parents had told me I would never be successful. They had been wrong. My house was quiet, my heart steady, my mind at peace. I did not keep rage inside me anymore. I kept a line no one was allowed to cross. Still, they came. Week after week, they returned to the porch. Sometimes they knocked for 10 minutes straight. Sometimes they left notes tucked in the frame of the door, notes that said things like, "We miss you," or "Please forgive us." I collected the notes and put them in a drawer, unread after the first lines. Forgiveness could not be summoned by repetition. One evening, I came home to find Emma sitting on the steps alone. My parents were nowhere in sight. She looked up at me with tired eyes. "They don't understand, Claire," she said softly. "They keep hoping you'll open the door." "And what about you?" I asked. She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't blame you." I wanted to hug her, to tell her I had never hated her, to invite her in and let her see the home I had built. But I didn't. Not yet. Because letting Emma in meant letting my parents' shadows creep closer, and I wasn't ready for that. I wished her well, handed her a bottle of water, and told her she could always sit there if she needed. But I did not unlock the door. I know some people would judge me. They would say family is family, no matter what. But I have learned that blood alone is not a ticket to my heart or to my home. Love is a currency, and my parents chose not to spend it on me when it mattered most. Now, they wanted access, but they wanted it at a discount, without paying for the years of neglect they owed. Inside, the house became my fortress. Each wall was a reminder that I had survived. Each bill I paid was a declaration of independence. Each night I locked the white door. I was not shutting them out. I was keeping myself in, safe and whole. As months passed, their visits grew less frequent. The flowers stopped coming. The notes stopped appearing. Eventually, it was only Emma now and then, standing quietly at the edge of the lawn before leaving without a word. I do not know what the future will ask of me. Perhaps one day I will find it in my heart to open the door, not for their sake, but for mine. Perhaps one day I will believe their words enough to risk letting them in again. But today is not that day. Today, I know this. I built a life in America with my own hands, my own mind, and my own strength. The white door is mine. My name is on the deed. My story is told by me, and I alone decide who may cross the threshold. And so, each evening as I sit at the table with my pen and my memories, I write not about the closed door, but about the open life I have built beyond it. A life of work, of growth, of peace. A life where I am no longer the shadow, but the light.